Okay, this is going to be a kind of a not a review. It's going to kind of review and then show how to split the crankcase on. This is on a 372 here, but this will apply to really any power saw. Still, Husqvarna, J-Red, McCullough, Homelight, whatever, new and old. The majority of them you can split with two I'm going to use. Some of them you will find the oddball one here or there that you won't be able to split. And in that case, I don't know what to do. But what we're using is the Husqvarna crankcase splitter. It's the best one I think out there that you can get. Here's the splitter. You can see, real good made, good quality, everything. About 80 bucks wherever you get it from, and I got this out of Bailey's, 80 bucks, and then it took a little bit to ship it because they had to order it from Husqvarna. Real good thing. I've split, let's see how many cases have I split. I probably split 5 cases with it so far, and real easy, doesn't booger it up. You know, you can do it off the studs, but it's way easier doing it with this. Real slick rig for, you know, getting the crank out of it and everything. And I got this, and then I ordered another tool that you really need is the flywheel knocker. You can make it and just threads on the flywheel, and then you bop it with a hammer. Knocks the flywheel off. Better than using a puller. That's what I used to use. It's better than a puller, but to get your case ready to split, so say, and this is the case in this saw blown up, pistons all scored and tore to pieces. So what I want is this crank out of this case for a 372. I'm going to try to build here. So we've got this saw tore down we've got the clutch off, oil pump off, everything on this side. Leave the chain brake on. We got the tank off of it. On the other side, coil off, flywheel off, wires. On top, we've got the muffler, carburetor. You do need to take the piston off. You have to take the piston off and everything to do this. There are there's 6 bolts in the crankcase, and you'll be able to see where the holes are for them. Make sure those are all loose. There's 4 here, 1 right here behind the coil, and then 1 up front in the case. Make sure all those bolts are loose, and you can pull them out if you want. But make sure those are all loose, because if not, you can break the case. The cases in these are magnesium, so they break really easy. Next off, get your splitter. Always start on the flywheel side. That's the best way. That's how you're supposed to do it. You could go to the other side. I just start on the flywheel side always. Get your splitter. Open it up all the way, pretty much all the way. Get a little bit of grease, just any old grease, little bit, and smear some grease on the point on the splitter. And what that does is that just makes it so it's not on the crank. It's not just wearing, metal on metal, wearing all hard on it. It gives it something slippery to move on, and just get some grease. That's the little thing I like to do, and some people do it. You can see, just put a little bit of grease right here on it. It's got a little bit of grease. Next off, go on the flywheel, pick the rod up, slide the 2 teeth behind the rod, down in the crankcase, in there, and then crank it up tight. Make sure it lines up in the hole on the crankshaft. Make sure it lines up in the hole. Lines in there, cinch it down tight, make sure the rod is in here, and then just start cranking it down, and it'll pop and bang and everything, and it'll start pulling the case apart. And oh yeah, let's see, that'd be nice. I'm not real good. I forgot about this. Where the carburetor sits up on top, the little plastic piece up here. This has to be off too. I'm not in my right mind. I'm sick, so pop these out. There's 4 bolts. Pop those out real quick. So we'll pop that out. I forgot about that. So just make sure those are popped out. You can even take 2 out. If not, it could either break the plastic or break a bolt off in there. And then you gotta go and fish a broke off bolt or get a new plastic piece or TIG weld the case if it breaks the case. That just pops out. Set that to the side. I'll set that over with the other parts. So now, just crank it on down. It'll come right apart. Crank it down. Like I said, it'll pop and bang, and you'll really have to put some force behind it. And you can see it pop there, and finally came out. Some are easier than others. Some will just press right apart. Some won't. You can see there it came off. Back it back off. Okay. You can see here we got the flywheel side off. You can see there it is, bearing and all in it. Everything's still attached. Just split it right in half. We'll go over in a second on how to get the bearing out of it. Come around to the clutch side. Same process. Make sure the rod's straight up and down. Slide it in there. I'll give you a look at what it looks like. I get it lined up. You can see how it lines up in here. Just sits down alongside there. It doesn't booger your case up or anything. Usually when you're pressing the crank out of the case, it just goes real easy. I can just turn it with one hand. There's not a whole lot of resistance. Just turning it out. Turn this out. Real slick rig here. And there it comes out. Slack it back off. You could probably make one of these splitters if you were handy enough, but they're just as easy to buy. And there you have it. You got the case out of here, and I see here is a piece of metal. I see a couple pieces of metal actually. That is probably, I know it's the cause of it. Here's 2 pieces of metal here. You can see that came out, and this is what the piston looked like from this saw. Let me find it here first. I got it somewhere around here. Where'd that piston go? Where'd I put it? I have it somewhere. Oh, there it is. Here it is. You can see here. Broke the skirt on it out. And this is the exhaust side. It's scored all the pieces. Rings are stuck on it. That was the piston that came out of this saw. This one here was an XPW. Yeah, this was an XPW. This would have been, let's see, it was a 75cc. It wasn't the X-Torque though. It was non-X-Torque. But that's how that's about the best way to split the case. And then to get the bearings out, I'll show you just on one side to get the bearings. But here's the crank on it. This one's a little oily. To test the crank on it, make sure, look on your bearing, your main bearing here. Make sure there's no chunks of bearing out of it. Make sure it's tight. Make sure nothing's broke on it. Make sure the rod doesn't have any cracks. Next off, hold it nice and firm down below. Hold the rod. And you're not looking for side-to-side play. It's supposed to have side-to-side play. You're looking for up and down. And you don't want to have any up and down. And this one here has no up and down play. So this is a good crank. This will go right into this new saw. Make sure that the ends are good, that they're not, broke or cracked or anything. The threads are good. Everything, oil pump, clutch side, and all that. Make sure those are good. Flywheel side threads are good. So this is a good crank. Next off, for getting we'll go and drive the flywheel side bearing out. That's the easiest. So you got your bearing in there. It's stuck in there. You don't want to just drive this out. It'll shave metal, and then shaving metal like that isn't good, because then when you put the new bearing in, it won't want to seat in there real good, and you can have a spun bearing. What you do, get you a propane torch or hot air gun, whatever you got. I wouldn't use acetylene. That would be a little bit too hot, unless you turn it way down, maybe. Light my torch up here. Light it up. You can use a you could use a heat sensor if you want to, a digital one. I don't. For installing the bearings would be nice, but go on the outer race of the bearing and the case, heat that up. Don't leave it in one spot, just circular motion, heat it up. It's going to smoke because it's going to have oil, and if the case isn't clean, it's going to smoke. If you don't have a temperature gauge, a good way to tell if it's hot is where you're holding it away from it. When you can start feeling the heat transfer in the case, you'll start feeling it get hot. That's a good sign, and then you'll be able to tell. You just use common sense on when it's hot and everything. And if you do use a heat sensor, you're supposed to heat this up to 390 degrees. Is where it's supposed to be, give or take. Don't stay in one spot. It's okay if you discolor the bearing, but don't stay in one spot, because you can discolor the magnesium and kind of make a weak spot in the magnesium and then have a case failure. But heat up the outer race on it between where the bearing goes into the magnesium. Heat that up, especially. That's where you're wanting to get the heat. Heat it up real good. Don't worry about your oil seal. I wouldn't suggest reusing them. I would suggest just getting a new one. Seal kit's not that much. Get new oil seals, crank seal, everything. All that, crank gasket, and just buy a new set. So don't worry about that. The seals or hurting those. You can kind of tell also on the bearing if the balls can start getting hot, then you know you got it pretty doggone hot. So this is good and hot. Sometimes if you get it good and hot, you can go take you a rubber mallet or hammer and tap it. I've found that not to work. Get you a screwdriver, just a flathead screwdriver. I just take this little tuning screwdriver, reach in there on the inner part of the bearing, and just tap it out. And it'll slide right on out with not that much effort. And there comes the bearing. It'll be hot, so pick it up with pliers. There's bearing. It's out, set it off to the side, let it cool, flip the case over to where the bearing was, take your little screwdriver on the oil seal, just set it on the oil seal, don't let the screwdriver fly away, just tap the oil seal out. This case now is removed of the bearing and oil seal and everything. This seal was bad in it, the spring came out probably because I heated it. Yeah, no, the oil seal's out. Oil seal will be hot too, so pick it up with pliers. No, that's how you get the case out. Next thing you could do, clean your case, parts washer, let it cool first, and then clean it really good. Clean both sides, up above, air compressor, parts washer, whatever, ultrasonic cleaner. Clean it real good. You can take the air jet off. I didn't take it off, just left it on there. Just pull that screw, and then basically that's all stripped to nothing. But you can see bearings out of it. To install new bearings, take your brand new bearing, throw it in the freezer for 30 minutes, or if you want, just throw it over overnight. Doesn't hurt it. Get it nice and cold. come out here, heat the inner part of the crankcase up to about 390 degrees, about the same, and then a little bit more maybe if you want. Make sure that bearing's good and froze, and then make sure this is nice and clean in here, and then you're supposed to be able just to drop that bearing and it will basically fall in there. Sometimes you might have to drive it. If it gets to be, if you drop it in there and you're really having to pound on it, heat it back up, and then just don't discolor the new bearing. Just nice and slow. Don't get too hot on it. Heat it up, bang it back in. But usually if you're quick enough, you can get it the first time and just kind of tap it the rest of the way in there. You tap it in, not until they seat. You want it just to where it's just a smidge below the crankcase, just a little bit below the lip of the crankcase on the flywheel and clutch side, and put the new main bearings in. Make sure they're in there good. After that, to install the crank, go on your clutch side, heat your bearing up, the inner race on the bearing, heat it up. You can throw the crank in the freezer for half an hour if you want, or get it just nice and cold. You could dip it in liquid nitrogen if you had it. And then a lot of the time, if you get it cold enough and hot enough, you can just set the crank right in there and it'll just fall. Make sure it seats all the way up against the back, but it'll just fall right into place. Might have to just pop it with a hammer. If you do, make sure you put your flywheel knocker on. Don't be just banging on the threads, because then your nut won't go back on. Put your flywheel knocker on, tap it in, and then as far as installing the case back again, they make the case installation tool you can buy. I don't know how much they are. What I usually do with mine is I just set it in there, and then I'll heat up my bearing on the flywheel side and freeze my crank again and set it in there. And sometimes they'll go on all the way, but then sometimes they'll go on halfway. But then what you do is just put your screws in and just cinch your screws up in a pattern to where it's not putting too much strain on either side, and it'll just cinch it back down that way. It takes a little bit longer. If you have the actual installation tool, that goes a lot quicker than doing it that way. But if you don't want to buy it, be cheap, you can just do it that way. But that's how I remove it. That's the best way to do it. With that tool, and like I said, tools you need are the flywheel knocker and then the crankcase tool. Those are the tools you really need to have. Seal installers, you can get those. They're nice. Driving the oil seals in with a deep well socket, you can do that. That's how I did it on mine. I haven't had mine leak. I've pressure vacuum tested my 372 twice. Didn't have it leak at all. Didn't have a leak on my intake boot, my crank seals, cylinder head gasket, or crankcase gasket. Didn't have any of the leaks anywhere. They're nice if you're going to do a professional job at it. You're going to want to warranty your work or become a dealer or do a good quick job at it. Just buy them. Me, I could get away with it just because really all I work on is 372s, 365s. I don't need to buy 15 different seal installers. If you were a dealer, you could get a real good deal on them. But that's how I do mine. And like I said, need the flywheel knocker and the crankcase splitter. The only other tool that really, if you're going to do it yourself, the only other real tool that would be nice is the installer tool for putting the case back together. That would be handy. That would be kind of probably one of these days I'll buy that, and then I might buy the seal installation tools too. But for now, that's the best way to start out, and that does a real good job. Propane Torch to knock it out with, and just make sure the main thing is you don't want to drive your bearings out, because it shaves metal when you do that, and then you put the new bearings in and it won't grab as good, and then your bearing will spin out, and you'll have your crank will get sloppy and eventually have some failure. And then just make sure you don't damage the case. Driving bearings out, driving them in, make sure you're not banging on the case or whatever. Just really focus on not tearing the case all to pieces, because if you do, you're going to have problems. And really take some time, if you're doing it for yourself and even for other people, really watch, not hitting the crankcase at all. But if you got any questions, you can leave a comment and I can answer them for you. And that's a pretty good way of doing it. I'll probably do a video some other time installing seals and bearings and everything one of these days when I decide to rebuild this other 372. But that's how I do it, and that's basically how the technicians do it too. So thanks for watching.